And you say that you started working with Tony Fauci 39 years ago. I heard you say, as I was taking notes in another interview you did, that he is both evil and stupid. And
I'm sorry. Did I actually say that out loud?
you did. And I want to explore that because you've got half of America who think he's here to save us. And you've got the other half, it appears to me, roughly, who believes that he has committed crimes against humanity for a long time that are just coming to light now because he is in league with Bill Gates, who has stated he has a eugenics agenda and that population control is the agenda of this administration that he seems to be working on. Talk a little bit about how you started working with him 39 years ago and what you saw play out.
Well, I want to correct that. I did not start working with him 39 years ago.
Okay.
I first encountered Dr. Fauci. Remember, I'm 24 years old. When I started working with Dr. Rossetti 37 years ago, June 6, 1983. Dr. Rossetti and I were part of the team that first validated Luc Montagnier, Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier's isolation and discovery of HIV as a causative agent of AIDS, a possible causative agent of AIDS. We isolated that virus from saliva and blood. We wrote a manuscript and had it in press, in publication. And one day when Dr. Rossetti's out of town, Dr. Fauci calls on the phone. I'm Dr. Rossetti's only employee technician. I answer the phone and I'm asked by Dr. Tony Fauci, who has on the line Dr. Robert Gallo. Dr. Gallo worked in the National Cancer Institute. Dr. Fauci was the head of the NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. So Dr. Fauci asked me for a copy of the manuscript, which was in press. I refused because it was confidential, it was in press, and it was highly unethical to give it to him. He became enraged on the phone, threatened to fire me for insubordination, told me he was, the boss. I don't care. I'm 24 years old and I never really cared who you are. It's ethics and reality and integrity and trust. You don't tell me to do something that's illegal, immoral, and unethical. And I did not do it. When Dr. Rossetti came back to town from his meeting, he was bullied and finally gave in and gave the manuscript to Dr. Fauci, who held up the publication of our manuscript, literally leading to the spread of the virus for several months until Dr. Gallo could copy it, make it his own work, literally steal and plagiarize our work, redo it in different samples, and which created, as you'll remember from HIV, literally a war between who discovered HIV, between Luc Montagnier in France, who clearly did discovered it as LAV, named lymphadenopathy virus. So, because of this so-called fight and this special interest, self-interest, it's all about me. I got the patents. I own the testing rights, this, that. HIV spread around the world, not only to susceptible populations at the time, the IV drug users, gay men, and prostitutes. Well, Frank Rossetti and I and others in the field were saying, well, that's ridiculous. Retroviruses don't know if they're infecting a man or a woman. And there were plenty of data that said that there were women getting infected with other kinds of retroviruses, children, and that somehow they were getting into the world in a way that was very different from what we were being told as a scientific community. And again, I'm watching this whole thing, as a kid who's a natural products chemist, and I isolate and make drugs out of plants and your own biological identical immune molecules. And so I'm watching this insanity play out, and nothing that Dr. Fauci, I mean, that single decade where he drove the therapies towards the T cell, which I just described in detail, because he had the patent, unbeknownst to us, because in fact, Frank Rossetti discovered interleukin 2, which was what Dr. Fauci admitted on tape. And I really just learned this several weeks ago. And that might have been the basis of my anger of stupid, because in pure evil, I've always believed. You know, how can you, you know, so knowingly all of the data, all of the evidence says that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. And yet hypotheses of alternative opinions, and it's very important right now with COVID, because SARS-CoV-2 coronaviruses don't cause the type of diseases and injuries we're seeing as a medical community. And I think you've seen that throughout the internet from the ER doc. And doctors are given protocols which they can't veer from without losing their jobs. So, you know, this was, you know, the earliest interactions through the 90s, because it was my PhD thesis, which I defended November 14th of 1991, so 28 years ago. You know, and really it was Magic Johnson who had just seroconverted, that is, made an antibody, meaning he was absolutely exposed to the virus because it got into his immune system and he made an immune response. So he became HIV positive on a sero test, that a serology test, antibody test. That does not mean he has AIDS. So what they asked me in my PhD thesis defense 1 week after that event on November 7th was when everybody saw that. And it's also memorialized in Time magazine. It's you know, on November 7th, 1991. So you can go back and see the press and see the media and see how that was played. And you know, because it wasn't a publication, and because I answered the question based on your thesis, on your molecular theory of causation and treatment strategy, will he or will he not get AIDS? And I said, he'll never get AIDS, but he has to change everything about the treatment strategy. And of course, that has played out to now we're like, wait a minute, what happened to AIDS? But because I didn't have to publish those works in a journal for 3 years before that, Dr. Rossetti and I had tried to publish those works in journals. And what people on the outside don't understand is that, you know, you have what's called peer review, and it's not peer review, it's competitor review. And if you know, if somebody doesn't want a paper published at the highest levels of government, everybody has to check off on it. Those papers are rejected or held up, and effectively censored again, while millions more die. So we had tried to publish several papers on our work from 87 to 91. And one of the peer reviews we got when we tried to submit my PhD thesis work was, I didn't believe your last paper either, it's contamination. You know, and it's like, okay, that's not a review. That's not a scientific review. You know, I didn't believe the last one either, rejected. I mean, this is throughout my career, every discovery we've made, because, you know, it goes against dogma and the old boys at the top, Tony Fauci, you know, they set the dogma. That's impossible. You know, treatment after treatment for diseases, for cancers, for severe things. Tony Fauci and the cabal at the top have held up as anecdotal evidence. And we've seen all of it. Anecdotal means storytelling. We've got thousands of publications, for instance, for hydroxychloroquine. It's on the WHO, which again, a corrupt organization, obviously in cahoots with Fauci and the people in our corrupt NIH at the highest level of HHS, corrupt FDA. You can't use that test, that serology test, in COVID. Oh, okay, we're going to use a PCR test, which means we're going to take a piece of RNA out of your nose. That's not a virus. That's not an infection. Until it gets beyond your immune system of your skin, of your nasal pharyngeal passages, into your blood, a true infection that develops an immune response, that's not an infection. So the books are being cooked on who's positive in SARS-CoV-2. And even worse, the disease doesn't fit. We don't have a single causative agent. SARS-CoV-2 is not the causative agent of COVID-19. And in fact, and it's absolutely clear, because if every person with that virus infection doesn't have the disease, it's not causative, just like I just explained to you for HIV. So for since 1984, Zika, Ebola, swine flu, bird flu, the Ebola of 2014 that killed 21,000 Americans. Tony Fauci has led the way to scare administrations and populations into vaccine strategies, into the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act of 1986, where all liability was removed from manufacturers of unsafe, untested vaccines, where that law has been broken. That law, when put in place, said the vaccine schedule has to be tested every 2 years. Del Bigtree, Bobby Kennedy Jr., with their FOIAs and legal inquiries, finally got a judgment in November of this year that said CDC has to take down vaccines don't cause autism, because they couldn't produce a single paper that say it doesn't. Not one safety study's been done on anything on the schedule for 36 years. And now it's very clear that these novel viruses, whether coronaviruses or retroviruses, the XMRVs we isolated from horribly sick people, and many, and highly associated with the mouse virus that jumped into humans from a contaminated blood supply and contaminated vaccines. It's all very clear. There's a tremendous amount of data on the corruption, the self-interest, the patents, the conflicts of interest of not only Tony Fauci, but Deborah Birx, Robert Redfield, who literally made our entire military sick and pushed his own agenda of evil, that somehow HIV/AIDS was God's punishment of people for their behavior. That's not how God works. So these people at the top need to go away right now. They're not stupid, but they're saying stupid things. The last thing you do is vaccinate with an influenza vaccine if you're trying to prevent another upper respiratory infection. That's clear for years. The data to support it. They even support it just last year, testing done in the military with respect to SARS-CoV-2. So everything needs to stop. The vaccine injury compensation program needs to end. Tony Fauci and everyone at the heads of the FDA, the CDC, the EPA with environmental toxins like 5G, like glyphosate and Roundup. Our soil is contaminated. Our water is contaminated. Our air is contaminated with chemtrails, with spraying. So these organizations organizations are not in any way protecting the public health, and leading it all is Tony Fauci threatening every president since Ronald Reagan and removing more and more constitutional rights, religious freedom, basic humanitarian human rights of informed consent and what to do with your own body, and then driving medical doctors who are currently treating with absolutely the wrong treatments and denying patients and treating patients like criminals.